So what we're planning on doing today is that I might just ask each of you in a moment just to briefly introduce yourselves in a round table, each of the panelists we're going to be presenting. Just a brief introduction so we know who the panel is. We'll go round table like that. And then we'll start and we'll give each speaker 2 minutes to recap on the paper that they have presented. And then each of the other 4 panelists then maybe if you had a comment or a question on that paper, it would be very useful. And then we'll open up then to if there's anyone else online who wants to join in with a question at that stage as well. And then we'll follow up with some summation from Paolo at the end and some talk about.
Oh no, we lost Niall, didn't we? Yeah, I guess is it gone for him, for you as well? Now, if you can hear you, we lost you. Okay, I guess in that case, maybe we could just briefly start with the introductions of each one of us, and then we'll continue with each one providing a 2 minute of the panelists providing a 2 minute summary. Oh, you're there now. Okay, good. You're muted.
That's the joys of being stranded in an airport. Technology sometimes gets you. So what I was saying is that we'll sum up at the end and we'll talk about the project. And yes, it was all about energy measures and how we thought that there was learnings that the global north can have from the global south and vice versa. And we thought this was a nice way of doing that. And we were very happy with the papers that were presented, and of course the ones that we accepted are the best of those. So we would look forward to the discussion that's going to take place here today. So a very brief introduction of myself, and then I'll go to Paula, and then we might go around the panel and just everyone says themselves. My name is Niall Dunphy. I'm the director of a research group at University College Cork in Ireland, senior research fellow in the university, and my research group focuses on people's relationship with energy. So the multitudes of people and the multitudes of different relationships that people have with energy. Paula, if I could pass over to you, and maybe you might introduce yourself briefly.
Yeah, thank you, Niall. So I'm a postdoctoral researcher at UCC. I'm working with Niall on the Energy Measures Project, which now will briefly introduce you in due course. And so yes, we're really happy. All the papers are so interesting. We could already see a lot of connections, and of course a lot of ways in which we could work together in hopefully in the end. So we will be talking about the book briefly. It would be interesting if you could also mention where you are right now. For example, right now I'm in Mexico. It's 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning. So that's yeah. So whoever would like to now introduce themselves.
It's always bad to look for volunteers, so maybe Nama, if you could go next.
Sure, thanks. Hi, I'm Nama Teschner. I'm a researcher at the Geography Department, Ben Gurion University, Israel. Know some familiar faces here, familiar names, some not, and happy to meet you all. I'm doing energy policy research in my lab, future energy systems, energy poverty, and other environmental related issues.
Great. Can we have Serena, please?
Hello, everyone. I'm Serena Saligari, and I'm a PhD student almost at the end at the University of Liverpool. I'm working with the Cleaner Africa Research Group, and we are based at the Department of Public Health. But myself, I'm an anthropologist, so I'm more interested in the social, cultural, and lived experience part of things. That's why I found that the paper was very well aligned to what I was trying to return through my research. And my research was based in Kenya, in an informal settlement, the outskirts of the town of Eldoret. And I was there during the pandemic, so it was very challenging, but also very interesting and yeah, alternative, I would say. And yeah, at the moment I'm in Italy because I'm originally Italian and I needed to recover some vitamin D from the pale British sun. So that's me.
That's great. Catherine? Catherine, you're muted if you're talking.
Oh, if you could introduce yourself, Catherine.
I'm sorry. I'm Katrin. The paper I present is a cooperation with lots of other people, and I can see one of my co-authors in the list of participants. That's Ute Dubois. Me myself, I'm first of all, I would like to apologize for doing this from a train. It's due to delays. This wasn't planned like this. Yeah, I'm a professor for urban sociology at Erfurt University of Applied Sciences. And my main topics are, I come from housing studies basically, and deal with energy poverty since like 10 years now. Yeah, and doing more qualitative kind of work. And I hope you could hear me.
We could, thank you very much. Gerardo, if you can hear us, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Gerardo. I'm a research fellow in energy justice and transitions at the Science Policy Research Unit, SPRU, University of Sussex. And I am presenting this paper on double energy vulnerability, which is part of the Center for Research into Energy Demand Solutions and is part of the work package on fuel and energy poverty in the United Kingdom. Looking forward to meeting you all and to engaging in this rich discussion, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerardo. I think that's all the speakers that have introduced themselves. So if anyone else would like to introduce themselves, we're a small group. Please raise your hand and please, or just speak. Don't be shy.
You want us to, even the participants?
Why not? Why not? It's a small group and it might open up the conversation a little bit to know where people are from.
Oh, okay. I'm Risa Lambert. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Development Planning Unit, or UCL. And I am working on a project which. Did you hear me?
Yes. Ute, would you like to say hello?
Yes, hello everybody. I'm Ute Dubois. I'm a professor at a French business school called ISG, and I've been working on energy poverty for the past decade, focusing on public policy analysis, especially in the French context. And I've also been a member of the Engager network, in which Catherine has been participating as well, and within which we made this research which is presented today.
I'm not seeing any other names on my screen. So if anyone else would like to speak, just please do so. Introduce yourself, otherwise we'll just commence.
I'm Maria José Manjón from the University of Comillas in Madrid. I'm in my third year of the PhD, almost. I hope I finish it in September. And this is my third paper. Well, I will present the paper in the second round of the panel. So just to say that I'm very proud to be in this panel with all of the people I know and I read about energy poverty. So that's and it will be very productive. Thanks.
Thank you. Very good. Anybody else before we start? Okay, so let me go over with. Yes, go ahead.
Oh yeah, so I just have here Coralie and Zeus too, in case they want to introduce themselves.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my camera. I'm postdoc now in École des Ponts in Paris, and I'm currently working in energy renovation in private rental housing. But before I did my thesis in sociology on food poverty and household strategies for coping with the injunctions to reduce energy consumption. And I will present in the second panel too.
Morning, I am Zeus Guevara from Tecnológico Monterrey in Mexico. Yeah, I will present you also in the next panel, and it's very, very early in Mexico, so I'm a little slow now.
Thank you, and thank you for your early morning as well. Very good. So let's get started. So as I said, what we'll do is we'll go through the papers in order that are listed on the program. 2 minutes just to give a brief overview, and then maybe if each of the other panelists could give a comment or a question on that, and then we'll open it up to the panel. So we'll start off with the first paper, which is on energy poverty, health and community resilience through the experiences of the Bedouins in Israel.
Okay, hi, thanks. So I deviated a bit from the abstract I sent because some questions just keep coming up, and it's really interesting to think beyond sometimes the actual paper. So yeah, we work. It's an ongoing work on the Bedouin community in Israel, ethnic minority, quite large, around 180,000 people. They are member of this small Muslim minority group, and they live. Half of them live very, very traditionally, and mainly, we should say, in informal housing with long-lasting dispute over land issues with the state of Israel, and really marginalized group and under infrastructure. And you all, I guess, or some of you at least, saw the presentation. So I won't get into much of the details of the background. What we are trying to understand is the situation of such pockets of energy poverty within Western modern countries with electricity grid that are usually very reliable and even affordable. And what we thought is to term it as extreme energy poverty, trying to somehow blur this dichotomy or divide between the North understanding of energy poverty and the Southern understandings of energy poverty. We found these kind of pockets or groups across Europe, also in the United States, in many developed or Western or northern countries, and we thought it deserves a bit of special conceptualizations in terms of energy poverty or energy insecurity. I do want to take another minute just to refer to a few of the points raised by my colleague here, which I think through these points I can further present my case. So, for example, Katrin and Ute are talking about the issue of trust. And we found in our survey very, very strong correlations between extreme energy poverty and trust in leadership. In fact, among all the other indices of community resilience, trust in leadership was indeed the strongest statistically linked to energy poverty. So I found it a very interesting common or shared point. Also, Gerardo, I really liked your presentation. It was really interesting. You talked about the exclusion of the energy poor from net zero policies. And I thought to myself, this is really, really interesting. And I hope you can elaborate a bit more about it, because when we talk about connecting or the connection of nations to solar panels, we found that this decarbonization or renewable energy transition may have the social cost. So it's not only the exclusion from this energy transition, but it's also may bearing future cost, future inequalities that I think research on energy poverty should further explore really timely. And lastly, just the last point, Abigail, I'm not sure she's here. She's from the maybe next session. She was also presenting, like Serena, a case study of Kenya, which was really interesting. And she was talking about they did the examination of mini grids, and they tried to look on are these affordable? Mini grid mainly based on renewable energy. Are affordable for rural communities without grid access? And they found that it's problematic. It's problematic in terms of affordability, in terms of technical issues. And we really relate to that as well, because as I said in the presentation, in my case study, many of these community groups, these households have their own solar panels. They kind of in the next stage of decarbonization, they have their batteries, but I think we should all still ask, is this a choice, and is this a sustainable kind of coping strategies or solution long run for energy poor households? Thank you.
Now you're muted.
The story of my life these last few years. Thank you very much. I was just saying you almost stuck to the 2 minutes. That was great. So what I might do now is just move immediately to the other panelists and ask for any comments, feedbacks, and any responses. And we might just go again in order of the presentation. So the first on my list is next is Katrin. Have you any comments or questions for Nama?
I think she might be having network connectivity problems because of being in the train.
It does look like that, so we might move on to Serena.
Yeah, thank you for this case study. It's really interesting from an anthropological point of view. I had actually very practical question when I watched your presentation, which is this solar panel, and you said that at some point they can also use small wind turbines. Who found this technology? Because I suppose it's like my case, LPG is a big agenda and the institutional component. So yeah, I was interested in the pragmatic.
Yeah, it's pragmatic, but unfortunately, it's also a very political question. At the end, everything is very political, and it's very interesting question. I think also the answers in this case, but it's a mixed sources. Some are completely self-funded. By the families. Especially the solar panels, which are not so expensive anymore to buy. So in the recent years, more and more people can afford buying them, including the home batteries. Some are funded by NGOs, either local or international, and other are funded by more institutionalized kind of political groups, I would say, religious political groups.
And next, maybe Gerardo, have you a question or a comment?
Hi. Yes. Well, actually, I prepared a 2 minute pitch, so I have some notes. I would like to read this. It's a case study that we went through in our research. So it's about 2 minutes. So Joe is a 52-year-old man living in a rental bedsit in a large city in Scotland, United Kingdom. Joe was interviewed for our project in the winter of 2020, and he told us that in the past he had spent 6 years living without any income or state benefits. This meant that for most of that time, Joe lived in a cold home and had few options for cooking hot meals, as the use of prepayment electricity meter was too expensive. During tough times, Joe accepted outside help, and in his own words, He was kept alive by a charity who kept him in sandwiches. At the time of our interview, Joe was working but had limited income, which meant that he still had to carefully ration his heating, hot water, and electricity use. Joe said that his main mode of transport was walking, despite living in a city with good public transport links. He could not afford to use the buses or trains. This meant sometimes walking long distances in cold and wet Scottish weather to get basics like food, attend work meetings, or catch up with friends. After walking in the cold, John returned to a cold home to eat a cold meal. Joe has, in effect, been living in and out of what we call double energy vulnerability for some time. In other words, he faces the simultaneous impacts of energy poverty and transport poverty. Joe's case sheds light on the importance of lived experiences as an analytical tool to consider the intersection between net zero ambitions, transport systems, and socioeconomic inequalities. So the question I wanted to raise to the panel is how and in what ways lived experiences can inform on key equity and justice dimensions of energy transitions. So, thank you. That was about 2 minutes, I think.
Thank you, Gerardo. I think there might have been a misunderstanding there, but I think we have your contribution, so that's fine. Maria, you had your hand up. Do you want to ask a question?
Well, I was I don't know if we are in NAMA part now.
Yes, yes, we are still there. Yeah, we can
okay.
go back there. Yeah.
I just have a NAMA. I'm very happy to your research because I was living in Israel for 3 years doing a project in the Negev desert, thermosolar plant Asalim. So we were dealing with the communities because the financing of the project requested that we have a stakeholders plan with them. So I know very well the problem. But when I am also trying to do research regarding extreme energy poverty. I agree with you that it needs to be addressed specifically in the energy policies because it's a totally different top approach because of the informal settlements and the irregularities. So do you have in your study also, did you think about, well, first of all, there is also the political approach in Israel that sometimes they are disconnected from the government, this kind of informal settlements for other reasons. And also, did you address the role of community development and the role of community development and the cohesion of the community in your to have solutions through the leadership, no, through the trust, and also social innovation approaches? Well.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. We will have to continue, I think, discuss after this session will be over. Nice to meet you. Yeah, just in very short, it's really interesting ideas. We didn't look not at the concept and also not at the level of the communities. I'm not working so much with communities. I'm working more on a policy level. So yeah, but these are mainly, especially, you know, more ethnographical kind of approach, like Serena was saying, from ethnography or anthropology, I mean, sorry, and also from a more community perspective. It's really, really urgent to work from that perspective, but it's not, yeah, a bit less of my expertise.
Yes, I'm asking you that because in the research, so at the policy level, what are your recommendations for this problem?
Oh, it's very simple to get a land agreement as fast as you can. Plan as a good villages for all the people and connect them to the grid immediately. I mean, there's no other solution, not in my perspective, but again, it's very, very complicated. So I think the solutions will be aggregated, you know, it will develop with time, and maybe there will be some more innovation in that respect. But,
no, because in the research I'm doing in Spain, there is also the same problem, and of course in all countries with informal settlements, irregular connections, illegal connections to the so that they are disconnected because of other issues like drugs and all that. So, well, I think the policy approach should also be more holistic and include also other perspectives like incentives for social innovation in these particular cases, or incentives for community development, because in the cases I researched in Spain, the community development is the one that is defending the rights and doing a lot. So maybe this empowerment of the community may also can be incentivized top down in some way. I'm thinking about this. So we can discuss after this, because I would like to continue this research and maybe we can collaborate on this.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Maria. Thanks, Naama. And Maria, I'm sure there'll be a chance in the other session as well to continue the discussion. There's a comment from Catherine in the chat where she said what she found interesting in the presentation was the counterintuitive evaluation of renewable energy infrastructure that showed how important choice and self-determination was in the field of energy poverty, and that showed how clearly we should be careful with our interpretations when looking at different contexts. I think that's a valid point. So, Naama, do you want to respond to that perhaps, or?
No, I think it's very valid. Yeah, I think we can.
Right. So what we might do now is just, if there's any other questions for Naama, we'll just take those now, and then I don't see any hands up. I have a hand up. I've muted.
Yes, I have one question. Did you look at the arrangements which were put in place to organize or to share this energy which is provided through the solar panels, for example, for these communities?
Sorry, just the beginning of the sentence. I didn't understand.
Yes, the question was whether you investigated what kind of arrangements people implement to.
Yeah, there's no need for arrangement, because it's each family has its own solar panel, so there are no deep, financial or yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, we must move on now because of time. So I see there are some hands up. If you could put your questions in the chat, we can collect them and we can go back to them at the later stage. Catherine, sorry, Amirardo, you presented your paper already, so we'll go to you now. If you could just, that last question that you asked us, if you could just rephrase that last question very briefly.
Yeah, sorry, apologies, I got really confused. Yeah, but the question is how and in what ways lived experiences can inform on equity and justice dimensions of net zero pledges or energy transitions in general. Yeah.
Okay, so if there's any comments or questions from Gerardo, please raise your hand. Naama, maybe I'll put the spotlight on you. You're first on my list here.
Yeah. So so as I said earlier, I would really like to, if you can expand in a couple of minutes on what you think on your last point of the presentation, which you didn't touch at all, about in which way you meant the exclusion from net zero policies, kind of participation. Like, what do you think about that? That would be really interesting for me.
Yeah, can I go, or should we?
Please go. Please speak. Yes.
Yeah. 1 minute. Naama, okay, Naama, thank you for your question. Yeah, I think the point we're trying to make is that in order for net zero pledges to be effective and to have an impact, we need to consider these inequalities that have been playing out for a long time in the 4 nations in the UK, right? So if you don't get to address these inequalities in terms of energy poverty or energy vulnerability, and people don't see a difference in their everyday lives and how they negotiate these spaces, then most likely this will lead to exclusion with net zero policies. So that's it. 1 minute, right? Or 30 seconds, I'm not sure. Yeah.
That was good timekeeping. Well done. Any other questions or comments from Gerardo?
Sorry, I just wanted to add a note. It's not really a question, it's more like a comment. Obviously, like my research and yours are from 2 different sides of the world, the global south and global north. something kind of that I saw also in Kenya, how transport poverty is kind of like an energy trilemma, and it relates to other things like energy poverty. You talk about transport poverty. I've noticed that transport poverty affects also food poverty, food security, because what I found in my field, so I was in an informal settlement, people were very poor, mostly informal labor, and they were energy poor because they were poor, but also because they couldn't move and go and buy fuel in cheaper places, like in bulks, because they didn't have means of transport. And at the same time, the same was for food. Because they were living at the margin of the city, they couldn't, for example, go and shop in a big supermarket that has offers, but they had to shop at the retailers that have increased price. And I found this very controversial of how poorer people tend to have a higher cost of life because of the material structural arrangements and constraints they are facing. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting dynamics that applies also in the global south.
Great, we'll take that comment, and there's a question in the chat from Katrin who asks, can you say something to how people decide where to cut expenses? And I notice also that you have his hand up. Do you want to come in and ask a question as well? You can package them all together. No, okay. Gerardo, if you can maybe just respond to that question from Katrin.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you, Catherine. I think it depends on case by case, but what we usually saw, because the analytical lens of this project is to look at energy and poverty vulnerability, is that sometimes people prioritize either transport or energy, right? And in this sense, they miss out on important dimensions of life. So I have an example. We had this case study in Scotland, and it was the father of 3 children, and because it was so expensive to go to a takeaway with his children, then what he would decide is to go on his own and then buy the takeaway food and bring it back to the household. And this is because he could not afford to pay a bus ticket for 4 people, right? So this is how they decide to prioritize. It depends on case by case, but usually transport or poverty are the dimensions that are being negotiated. And of course, food is important, but we are not really looking at that analytical lens in the project. Thank you.
And there's a question in the chat, which I will take up last time, and we missed it out. So he asks, where do you draw the borderline between the two phenomena, as there are broad theoretical overlaps? For example, gasoline an energy expense, and transport infrastructure is fundamental for energy provision.
Well, yeah, that's a really important question and a really complex question as well. But I think that where do we draw the borderline is on the analytical definitions that we have, right? And is that sometimes people cannot afford to spend what they want or the dimensions they deem important for life in these 2 dimensions. So, of course, there will be a blurry line, but it is important just for analytical purposes to keep the 2 definitions separate. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. We must move on, I'm afraid, now. So if there's any more questions, please put them in the chat. And we'll move on to Katrin. Katrin, if you're able to join us, please do. And you have 2 minutes. We're not hearing you, Katrin, so we might move on. Is there any, sorry, Jute?
Yes, maybe I can say a few words on this study in case
Sure.
Katrin cannot cannot join and speak. Well, very quickly about this this work we did. It was a project which has emerged when we discussed about the lived experience of energy poor households in different contexts. And so as a network in the Engager network, we decided to do a cross country study interviewing households facing energy poverty problems. So we interviewed more than 50 households in various countries, and we had interviews reflecting very different situations, people who have been cut off from electricity, for example, in Germany, people facing summer energy poverty in certain Southern European countries. We had also people who were living in, well, in very, in high deprivation or even extreme energy poverty situations. And so what we wanted to investigate is the role of trust, because, well, the initial idea was to say, well, there is a topic of trust which seems to appear when we talk to people in energy poverty and who might have difficulties in their contact with institutions, for example. So there is the topic of interpersonal trust and of the institutional trust as well. And so, well, what we found out is that actually many of the households we interviewed reported experiences with trust. So trust issues in their relations, especially with the institutions. And so we found out that, for example, well, people had experience in the relation with institutions which destroy trust. So people can feel they are not treated in an adequate way. And we had the other effect also that if there is a lack of trust, this can contribute to energy poverty, because, well, they if people don't trust the system, they will not tend to ask for help, because anyway they think that the system works against them somehow. And so then we also so this is the negative part of the story. We had also a few stories of people where they said, well, there are experiences where trusts can be created in the lived experience of energy poverty. For example, when people are helpful, people in institutions are helpful, or when there is this self-organization between people. For example, in the case of Spain, there were interesting stories about that. And also in the interpersonal trust, well, if there is interpersonal and institutional trust, it allows people to better cope with the problem of energy poverty. And so for us, it was a first research showing that, well, this topic of trust should really be well, given some consideration in looking at the lived experiences of energy poverty, because people are not energy poor in isolation. There also this energy poverty can also be a kind of relational thing where people interact with other people, with institutions, and this social aspect, or this plays a role in in people's energy poverty situations and in their ability to cope with the situation.
Jutta, thank you very much for stepping in, and I see Catherine has thanked you as well for taking her place. That's great. That's very interesting. There's a question already in the chat, and very efficiently there's an answer from Catherine. So yours was asking, was there a guide for achieving trust, increasing energy poverty, decreasing virtuous circle? And Catherine responded, yes, train the officers and institutions, make them to switch perspectives to create respect and so forth. Are there any other questions for Jutta or Catherine in the chat? Just raise your hand now, or maybe put them in the chat. So I see Maria. We'll take one question verbally, and then we'll go to the chat for any other questions, and we'll go on to the next speaker then. So Maria, if you could.
Yes, I have a question for Catherine and Ute. just in relation to the energy justice framework, and how do you connect trust within this framework? If it would be an element, or it's just, I mean, just the connection, the theoretical connection. If you can give an explanation on this.
Well, perhaps if we relate it to energy justice, it's justice as a recognition of the needs of people. And so if we look at the recognition of the difficulties of people, this is very much related to the trust dimension we discuss in the paper. And so the one conclusion of this work would be that, well, for example, people working with energy poor households should be aware that, well, the recognition plays an important role, because this is favorable to trust, and so it creates a framework where you can help people getting out of energy poverty. But maybe Catherine would like to ask to add something. Sorry.
It's great, Julia. Thank you for that. Katrine, if you have anything to add, please put it in the chat. She agrees. So that's good to hear. The co-authors agree. So if there's any further questions for Katrine and Ute, please put it in the chat. We'll move on now to our next and our final speaker, which is Serena. And apologies for the delay.
Yeah, thank you. So as I anticipated before, my paper is based on a study we did in Kenya. This is a study that I conducted with my research group, so it's a bit like the side of my PhD. And I'm speaking also in behalf of my colleague, Matthew Schupler, which did the more quantitative part of the study. So basically the idea is that is the one of returning the lived experience of regressing to be energy poor. Basically in Kenya, there was a big agenda to foster clean energy transition, which saw LPG gas bottle as the major asset to promote clean cooking. And there were a lot of policies implemented, amongst which, for example, LPG was VAT exempted for over 5 years. LPG was made much more available through infrastructural intervention, and this really expanded LPG that transit to be used from only 13% of the population to over 24% in only 5 years. And the government has the target to reach 35% by 2030. So it's an ambitious target that seemed, though, to be possible to achieve until the COVID pandemic hit, and this represented a massive income shock for the population. Firstly, because most of the economy is informal economy, and the daily laborer, which are employed in the informal economy, lost their income for months. And this meant that the most vulnerable group that already face like food insecurity and the security that are connected to energy poverty had to prioritize their incomes, and often reverted to use polluting fuels like charcoal, wood, kerosene, that are not necessarily cheaper, but can be purchased in small amount. And because they have this hand-to-mouth financial mechanism, if they spare, let's say, the equivalent of £5, they'd rather buy charcoal because they can save up to buy a refill. And the second income shock was even more shocking in a way, because is the fact that the government reintroduced the VAT, 16% VAT on LPG refill in July 2021, when I was doing my ethnographic fieldwork. And this was a real shock, because it was already a very fragile economic conjuncture in which Kenyans were suffering from the pandemic consequences, and the price of gas skyrocketed. And this was a very, let's say, regressing policy, because obviously the government couldn't afford to keep LPG VAT exempted, but people couldn't understand why it increased so massively. And then we know LPG is really subjected to like international fluctuation of prices. So basically in the presentation, we explore how people received this policy and which were the most vulnerable groups. And the question to reply is like, how can we make community more resilient to this kind of shocks that are often unforeseen and unprecedented, like the pandemic? So that was
great, Serena. Thank you very much. I'm very mindful of the time. We have 3 minutes until the next session. So what I suggest is people put the questions in the chat for efficiency, and we can take them here in the next minute or two. So if you have a question, put it in the chat, and that will allow us to do it faster rather than going around. And Serena, maybe if and as they pop up in the chat, if you can respond to them directly, that would be the most efficient way of getting through them. So please don't be shy.
The good thing is that it's the same of us probably on the next panel, so you know we can continue if that's necessary.
I just thought it's a very interesting research. It's really exemplify this shock thing that we talk about a lot in how to increase resilience, and suddenly there is this case which is really I think it's unique the way that it evolved. Yeah, but I don't have any specific question. Thank you. It's very interesting.
It is absolutely, and it was very interesting from my perspective. It's very interesting to see that, you know, we see kind of similarities between the global south and the global north. It wasn't about access, it was about affordability, and you know, again, it shows that there's a lot of commonality in energy poverty in the global north, global south. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, and I think it connects as well to your question, Nama, that you posed to Gerardo about the net zero transition. Like, you know, because that's something that was actually happening in Ireland as well, with gas going up. People started deciding to buy coal again and wood again.
So thank you to all the speakers. It was very interesting reading your papers and listening to your videos. And the different techniques used were quite interesting too. So very good. Paolo, do you want to say some words maybe to wrap up and before we move on to the next session?
Yeah, so we will be talking about the book maybe in the next session. So just keep tuned, all of you. I hope that all of you can join. Yeah, so we don't overrun, and then we'll discuss the book more. Thank you so much, everyone. See you in the next session.
Okay, thank you all. So we'll see you on the other side, as they say.